There comes a moment in every believer's life when God stops asking and starts requiring. The Sabbath is that requirement. Not a suggestion, not a cultural tradition, not an optional spiritual activity. It is the declaration of loyalty stamped into time by the Creator himself. And if you want to know how to keep the Sabbath holy, you must first understand why God made it holy. Keeping the Sabbath holy begins long before the sun sets. It begins in your heart, in the decision that says, God, your presence is more valuable to me than my schedule, more sacred than my habits, more important than my convenience. Holiness is not an accident, it's a choice. And choosing the Sabbath is choosing God over everything else that pulls on you. The Sabbath is the one commandment the world constantly tests, constantly twists, constantly fights. Why? Because it confronts the pride of man. It reminds kings and presidents, CEOs and workers, rich and poor alike, you are not God. You are not in control. You are dust shaped by divine breath. When you stop working because he said so, you declare that heaven is your source. When you choose rest in obedience, you wage war against every idol demanding your attention. To keep the Sabbath holy, you must learn the art of separation. That means you disconnect from the world so you can reconnect with God. Shut off the noise, shut down the chaos, turn your home into a sanctuary, not because you're forced to, but because you hunger for his presence. The Sabbath is not a prison, it's a palace. It's not bondage, it's freedom. It's the day heaven opens its doors and says, come in and rest. Holiness requires preparation. You cannot enter the Sabbath rushing, stressed, distracted, and divided. That's why God gave you 6 days. 6 days to put things in order. 6 days to finish the work. 6 days to clear your path so that the seventh day can be sacred. Sabbath keeping is not just about resting. It's about making room. God will not fill a sail you refuse to empty. And when the Sabbath arrives, you honor it by honoring the one who created it. You spend time in his word. You gather with his people. You pray, you reflect, you worship, you breathe. The Sabbath is not about what you can't do. It's about what you get to do. You get to experience peace the world can't buy, joy the world can't steal, and rest the world can't imitate. You keep the Sabbath holy by giving God what belongs to God. Your time, your trust, your attention, your heart. Not half of it, not a corner of it, all of it. Because holiness is not part-time, it's a lifestyle. And when you honor God in his time, he will honor you in yours. If you want to stand in the storm, if you want strength in crisis, if you want clarity in confusion, if you want power for the final days, then learn to keep the Sabbath holy. Because those who honor the Sabbath now will have the faith to stand when the whole world bows. The Sabbath is not just a command. It is your covenant. Guard it, cherish it, keep it holy. The heart of holiness. Why the Sabbath still matters today. The heart of holiness has never been about rituals, restrictions, or routines. It has always been about relationship. And nowhere is that relationship more clearly defined, protected, and honored than in the gift God called the Sabbath. The Sabbath is not a relic of ancient religion or a ceremonial shadow that faded at the cross. It is the weekly heartbeat of the Creator, woven into the rhythm of existence itself. It is the pause that reminds the soul of its true identity. It is the sign that heaven placed upon humanity to say, you belong to me. When we talk about why the Sabbath still matters today, we must understand that we are not discussing a day on a calendar. We are discussing the posture of the heart. In a world where noise has become normal and exhaustion has become expected, the Sabbath still stands as God's divine interruption. It cuts through the chaos like a holy blade, separating what you do from who you are. The Sabbath whispers to the overwhelmed, you are not a machine. It declares to the stressed, you were not created for endless grind. And it assures the weary, your worth is not measured by your productivity. The Sabbath protects the humanity inside the human. It shields the soul from being swallowed by the demands of the week. It is heaven's way of rescuing you from the slavery of ceaseless labor. just as surely as God rescued Israel from Egypt. In fact, that's why God tied Sabbath to deliverance. Because anyone who forgets to rest eventually forgets they are free. The Sabbath still matters because it reveals what we truly worship. In life, we always give our time to what we value most. Some people bow to their schedules, their ambitions, their income, their deadlines. But God asks humanity to bow to Him through trust. That is the core of Sabbath obedience. Trust. It takes faith to stop. It takes faith to rest in a world that rewards the constant hustle. It takes faith to set down the tools, silence the screen, close the laptop, and say, God is still in control, and the universe will continue functioning without me. The Sabbath is a weekly reminder that God sits on the throne, not us. It dethrones pride, dismantles anxiety, and disrupts self-sufficiency. Every Sabbath is a protest against the illusion that we are our own providers. It is a declaration of dependence, not on systems, not on society, but on the living God. The Sabbath still matters because it reconnects us to creation. When God finished shaping the world with His hands and speaking life with His voice, He rested not because He was tired, but because He was teaching. Rest completes the cycle of creation. Without Sabbath, life becomes a blur of motion, without meaning. When we rest, we step back into the rhythm that God Himself set. We breathe again, we see again, we remember again. The Sabbath realigns the soul with the natural order, reminding us that life is more than work, more than achievement, more than survival. It is communion, reflection, and gratitude. The Sabbath still matters because it reconnects us to God. In the stillness of the holy hours, heaven comes near. Distractions fade, spiritual sensitivity heightens, and the heart becomes capable of hearing God's voice again. Sabbath is not just a break from labor, it is an appointment with God. It is the meeting place where the Creator leans close to His children and refreshes them with His presence. It restores what the week has drained. It fills what the world has emptied. It strengthens what life has weakened. And ultimately, the Sabbath still matters because we still need holiness. We still need sacred time. We still need moments that are not swallowed by the urgent or the ordinary. Holiness requires separation. Sabbath is that separation. It is God carving out a sanctuary in time, a place untouched, unbothered, and unapologetically His. The world changes, culture shifts, technology advances, but the human soul still hungers for what only God can give. That's why the Sabbath remains, because holiness still matters, rest still matters, God still matters. Preparation determines worship. How to enter the Sabbath with peace. Preparation is one of the most overlooked spiritual disciplines, yet it determines the depth and quality of everything we experience with God. Just as a seed grows according to the soil it is planted in, worship flourishes according to the heart that enters it. And nowhere does this principle shine more clearly than in how we approach the Sabbath. The Sabbath does not begin when the sun sets. It begins in the heart long before. Peace on the Sabbath is not accidental. It is the fruit of intentional preparation. When we understand this, the Sabbath becomes more than a day to keep. It becomes a blessing to receive. Throughout Scripture, God taught His people that preparation determines worship. Before Sinai, before the sanctuary services, before the feasts, before moments of divine encounter, God always called His people to get ready. Not because He needed it, but because they did. Preparation clears space for God. It pushes aside the clutter that competes for our attention. It breaks the momentum of the week, so the soul can slow down enough to feel the presence of heaven. Without preparation, the Sabbath becomes rushed, stressful, or routine. But with preparation, it becomes a sanctuary of peace. The difference is not in the hours, it's in the heart. When we approach the Sabbath without preparation, we drag the noise of the week with us. Our minds stay tangled in unfinished tasks, undone chores, unanswered messages, and unresolved problems. We sit down but our spirits keep standing. We enter the Sabbath physically, but mentally we're still in the workplace, in the market, or in the battles of yesterday. That is why preparation is a form of spiritual warfare. It confronts the forces that try to steal the blessing before the Sabbath even arrives. By preparing, we declare, this time belongs to God, and nothing else will compete for it. Preparation is also an act of love. When you prepare for someone you care about, it shows honor. You tidy up before a guest arrives, because you respect them. You plan before meeting a friend, because they matter. How much more should we prepare for meeting the King of the universe? The Sabbath is God's weekly appointment with His people. Preparation is our way of saying, Lord, you are worthy of intentional attention. It turns the Sabbath from a duty into a delight. It transforms the day into something anticipated rather than endured. True preparation begins in the mind. It means slowing the internal pace, clearing the emotional fog, and making room for quiet. It may look like finishing work early, planning your meals, settling your obligations, or managing your schedule in advance. But deeper than that, it is preparing your heart, letting go of grudges, releasing the pressures of the week, and setting your thoughts toward God. The enemy knows that an unprepared spirit is an easy target. That's why he fights hardest on the edge of the Sabbath. He tries to provoke arguments, disrupt peace in the home, stir up anxiety, or introduce last-minute chaos. But when your heart has already prepared, those attacks bounce off a settled soul. Preparation becomes your shield. Entering the Sabbath with peace is not about having a perfect house, a perfect schedule, or a perfect week. It's about having a heart that is ready to receive God's presence. When you prepare spiritually, you create room for joy. When you prepare mentally, you create room for rest. When you prepare practically, you create room for peace. And when these come together, the Sabbath does not simply arrive. It enters your life like a gift wrapped by heaven itself. Preparation determines worship, because worship requires intention. The Sabbath is holy time, but it becomes holy experience only when we enter it with a heart that is settled, surrendered, and expectant. When you prepare for the Sabbath, you are not just getting ready for a day, you are getting ready for an encounter. And when you prepare well, you will always enter the Sabbath with peace. The Sabbath and your identity, remembering who you belong to. Identity is one of the greatest battlegrounds in the world today. People search for who they are in achievements, labels, culture, careers, relationships, and the opinions of others. But every one of those foundations can shift, crumble, or disappear. The Sabbath stands as a divine reminder that your identity does not come from what you do, what you produce, or how the world measures you. It comes from who you belong to. And every seventh day, God calls you to step out of the noise, step away from the pressure, and remember the truth. You are mine. When God said, remember the Sabbath day, He wasn't just protecting a command, He was protecting your identity. Because life has a way of making you forget. The world pushes you, pulls you, and tries to define you by your productivity. You become your job title, your accomplishments, your failures, your income, your mistakes. You become whatever the system says you are. But the Sabbath interrupts that lie. It breaks the cycle that says you are only as valuable as what you can produce. By resting, you declare, I am not owned by the world. I belong to God. That single act is a powerful statement of identity, more powerful than any self-help, affirmation, or motivational speech. It is identity rooted in relationship, not performance. The Sabbath also reminds you that your worth was established before you ever did anything, before you worked, before you succeeded, before you failed, before you struggled. God created you, blessed you, and sanctified a day for you. This means the foundation of your identity is older than your first breath. It goes back to creation itself. That's why the enemy hates the Sabbath. Because every Sabbath you remember who you are and whose you are. And a person who knows their identity is a person the devil cannot easily control. The Sabbath repositions your heart. All week long you fight to survive, to earn, to achieve, to keep up. But when the Sabbath arrives, God invites you to step into a different posture, not striving, not proving, not competing, just being His. The Sabbath is like a weekly reset button, pulling you out of the world system and placing you back under the truth of heaven. You are not defined by your deadlines. You are not chained to your past. You are not the sum of your accomplishment. You are a child of the Most High God, created in His image, redeemed by His blood, and sustained by His grace. This identity is reinforced through rest, worship, reflection, and time spent in God's presence. When you slow down enough to hear His voice, you are reminded of your true value. When you stop long enough to breathe, you remember that your life depends on God, not on your hustle. When you step away from the demands of people, you remember you were made for a purpose greater than pleasing them. The Sabbath is not about restriction, it's about restoration. It restores your sense of self. It reclaims your identity from the hands of the world and places it back into the hands of God. The Sabbath also strengthens your identity through community. You enter the day not alone, but as part of a people who carry the mark of God's covenant. Keeping the Sabbath links you to a line of believers who resisted oppressive systems, remembered God in times of captivity, and held on to faith when the world around them lost its way. It reminds you that you are part of a story bigger than your own, a story of deliverance, freedom, and divine identity. When you keep the Sabbath, you stand among those who dare to live by a different rhythm, a heavenly rhythm. Every Sabbath, God whispers, remember who you belong to. In a world constantly trying to take ownership of your time, your mind, your loyalty, your values, and your identity, the Sabbath declares that you belong to God and God alone. And when you know who you belong to, you know who you are. The battle for your time. How the enemy attacks the Sabbath. Time is one of the most sacred gifts God has given humanity, and because of that, it is one of the most aggressively attacked. The enemy knows he cannot stop God's blessings, but he can distract you from receiving them. He knows he cannot erase God's commandments, but he can crowd your life with so much noise that obedience feels impossible. That is why the Sabbath is not just a day of rest, it is a battlefield. And every week, the enemy wages war against your time, your peace, and your focus, hoping that if he can steal your Sabbath, he can weaken your relationship with God. The enemy attacks the Sabbath long before it arrives. He stirs up busyness, deadlines, pressure, and exhaustion. He fills your schedule with work that feels urgent, but is often meaningless. He makes you believe you don't have enough time to rest, that everything will fall apart if you step away. The enemy knows that if he can keep you running non-stop, he can keep you spiritually empty. A believer who never stops, never breathes, never pauses, never reflects, is a believer who is easy to manipulate. That is why the Sabbath is a divine weapon, because it stops the momentum of the enemy's pressure. It forces you to break the cycle and reclaim the time God set apart for your soul to breathe. He also attacks the Sabbath through distraction. You prepare for the day, but suddenly your phone blows up. Problems arise, drama unfolds, or unexpected tasks try to demand your attention. The enemy knows that he cannot take the Sabbath away, but he can fill it with noise, so you never experience its power. He tries to pull your mind into work, into stress, into the problems of yesterday. He tries to make holy time feel like just another day. But the Sabbath requires intentional focus. It requires you to close the door on distraction and open your heart to God. When you do, you push back against the enemy's chaos with divine stillness. Sometimes the enemy attacks the Sabbath through guilt. He whispers lies that say, "You're not worthy to rest. You haven't done enough to deserve peace," or "God won't bless you if your week wasn't perfect." But the Sabbath was never about perfection. It was about relationship. God didn't say work until you earn the Sabbath. He said remember it. The enemy twists your thinking, making rest feel like a reward instead of a command. But God gave the Sabbath to humanity as a sign of identity, a mark of freedom, and a gift of restoration. You don't rest because you earned it. You rest because you belong to God. Another strategy of the enemy is to make the Sabbath seem burdensome. He tries to turn it into a list of rules, draining it of joy and making it feel like a restriction instead of a blessing. When the Sabbath becomes a burden, the heart grows weary of keeping it. But God created the Sabbath to lift burdens, not create them, to heal the soul, not strain it, to bring joy, not stress. When you approach the Sabbath with the right heart, it becomes a weekly sanctuary, a place where the enemy's grip loosens, where chains break, where peace returns. Ultimately, the enemy attacks the Sabbath because he understands its power. A rested believer is alert. A believer who pauses is harder to deceive. A believer who spends time in God's presence is harder to tempt. A believer who honors the Sabbath stands in open defiance of the world's system. The Sabbath is a weekly reminder that your time, your heart, and your loyalty belong to God, not to your job, not to society, not to stress, not to the enemy. The battle for your time is real, but so is the victory God gives. Every Sabbath you keep is a declaration that you will not bow to the rhythm of Babylon. It is a statement that your time is not for sale, your soul is not available for the enemy's agenda, and your peace belongs to God alone. When you guard the Sabbath, you guard your identity. When you honor the Sabbath, you resist the enemy. And when you fight for the Sabbath, heaven fights for you. Resting is resistance. The Sabbath versus the world's demands. Rest is not passive. Rest is not weakness. Rest is not laziness. In a world that glorifies busyness, productivity, and constant motion, true rest becomes a form of rebellion. The Sabbath is God's weekly declaration that you are not a slave to the demands of people, culture, systems, or circumstances. It is a holy act of resistance, standing against a world that never stops, never slows down, and never allows the soul to breathe. When you honor the Sabbath, you are not simply resting. You are fighting back against every force that tries to own you. The world measures your worth by how much you can produce. Babylon says, work more, grind harder, never slow down. It teaches you to tie your identity to your accomplishments, your schedule, and your ability to keep up. But the Sabbath breaks that chain. It declares, you are not what you produce. You are who God created. Rest is resistance because it exposes the lie that everything depends on your effort. When you stop working, the world does not collapse. Creation continues. God still reigns. Life moves forward without your constant striving. That alone is a spiritual victory. The Sabbath resists the pressure of comparison. In a society built on competition, people are always trying to outrun each other. More achievements, more money, more status, more noise. The Sabbath teaches you to stop running, to stop measuring yourself by others, to step out of the race. When you rest, you declare that you are not in competition with anyone. You are secure in God's timing, God's calling, and God's plan for your life. That is a kind of freedom the world cannot understand. Rest is resistance because it challenges the world's control over your time. Time is the most valuable resource you have, and the world wants all of it. Workplaces want it, entertainment wants it, advertising wants it, stress wants it. The Sabbath is a divine boundary line, God marking out sacred time and saying, this belongs to me. When you honor that boundary, you reject the world's demand for ownership over your life. You reclaim your time as holy. You reclaim your mind as sacred. You reclaim your spirit as untouchable. The Sabbath is also resistance against anxiety. The world wants you worried, overwhelmed, and mentally scattered. A stressed person is easier to manipulate. But the Sabbath interrupts the cycle of fear. It forces the mind to breathe and the heart to slow down. It reminds you that God, not pressure, not panic, is your source. Rest becomes warfare because it quiets your soul long enough for God's voice to drown out the enemy's lies. In stillness, faith is strengthened. In silence, clarity returns. In rest, God restores what stress tried to destroy. The Sabbath is resistance because it protects your humanity. The world wants machines, efficient, tireless, emotionless, available at all times. But you are not a machine. You are a soul. You need rest, worship, connection, stillness, and space to simply be. The Sabbath honors the image of God within you. It reminds you that you were created for relationship, reflection, and presence, not endless labor. Rest defends your dignity in a world that treats people like tools. The Sabbath also resists spiritual drift. Without intentional rest, life becomes a blur. Days blend together. Priorities get lost. God's voice gets drowned out by the noise of routine. The Sabbath recalibrates your spirit. It pulls you back into alignment. It recenters your identity on God instead of the world's demands. Each Sabbath becomes a reset, a renewal, a reminder of what truly matters. In the end, resting on the Sabbath is not just about what you stop doing. It's about what you are declaring. You are declaring that God is your source. You are declaring that you refuse to bow to the idols of productivity. You are declaring that your soul is not for sale. You are declaring that heaven, not Babylon, sets the rhythm of your life. Resting is resistance, and the Sabbath is where that resistance becomes holy, powerful, and victorious.